I'm Dr. Jam Kothari.
And I'm Dr. Sally Moore. And this is a Myeloma Minutes, a podcast for people affected by myeloma, patients, friends and family. Hi Jam, so nice to see you. Happy 2026. Here we are, it's daytime and we're going to launch into a whole other year of podcasts, and I wonder where we'll be actually this time next year and what we'll be talking about. But that's kind of going to anchor what we're speaking about today, isn't it, Jam, really? And that, goodness, particularly in light of the podcast with Kerry and Karthik and all the change that happened in 2025, what's going to happen this year? So I'm really looking forward to this podcast actually with you and just having a good old chinwag about all that's come before and all that's ahead of us.
Definitely, Sal. Happy New Year. It's World Cup year. England are looking good. Oh no, sorry, that's my other podcast gig. Sorry, we're talking about myeloma, but yeah, and I've been asked to talk about England's World Cup prospects. Well, it's the second year of the pod. We've completed our first year. It's been great fun chatting with you and having our guests and the feedback, the lovely feedback that we've had and ideas for podcasts. And I'm looking forward to year two, Sally, because as you said, there's so much happening in myeloma and it will be lovely to anchor 2026 with this discussion today. And we're really looking forward to having more voices on the pod because I think people have really appreciated hearing the voices of those undergoing treatment or experiences of their journey with myeloma.
Completely agree. As lovely as we find the sounds of our own voices, and I suspect our listeners do too, great to get those different perspectives. I personally find it really enriching actually, and there's so many perspectives and professionals and experts that we'll be able to pull in, and there's a lot actually coming up in the diary for 2026 as well, Jam, isn't there? I mean, we've got a meeting in Oxford next month in February, and then there's a really big international meeting coming up in September in Glasgow and lots in between. And so we can't wait to update all our listeners as time goes by about these really important events.
A big year for UK myeloma because, Sally, as I understand it, this will be the International Myeloma Workshop. It's held annually, and I don't think it's ever been held in the UK before. Is that correct?
The first one actually was in the UK.
Oh, there you go.
I think the first one was at Blenheim Palace, and that was ages ago. So, and I don't know if the organisers, as a big international committee, decided to approach the palace again, but I suspect it's far bigger than it was then. So, wow. Glasgow it is. Glasgow it is,
and that will be in September. What we thought we'd talk about today, Sally, is things of interest for 2026. So new drugs that potentially will be licensed, which is different from necessarily being available in your country, wherever you're listening, but certainly licensed and deemed to be safe and effective for myeloma patients. And then I thought you thought it'd be a nice idea, which I think is lovely, to just go through some of the feedback and ideas for further topics that people are interested in. And certainly we're hoping to cover, a lot of those topics this year. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about, how we see 2026 going, what we're most excited about, and also, what we're worried about a little bit in terms of, day-to-day treatment of myeloma on the ground.
Yeah, brilliant. A lot to cover, a lot to squeeze in. So let's see how we get on.
Right. So should we start with what new approvals we might be expecting in 2026? What I mean by that is combinations of drugs or new types of drugs that will be licensed.
It's a conversation which is very relevant in light of the big international meeting that was in the States in December, and actually points to some of the conversations that we had with Karthik and Kerry. But just to clarify for our listeners, when we talk about licensing, this is where a trial, which often shows how well a treatment or combination of treatments work, then goes for approval to an international body to say, actually, yes, these drugs do work as well as they are said to work, and therefore, in theory, this treatment can be prescribed because it does what it says on the tin. That's very different, actually, from an approval, which we often speak about, which is where a country or a region of a country then says, actually, okay, we agree, not just this drug has its license, but actually we can afford to give it to our patients because it meets all our local criteria. And so there are approvals that come through NICE, but before any drug is approved, it needs to have its license. And I guess we're going to speak about the licensing, which tells us about the drugs that might be available in the UK or in other countries in the world, potentially later this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after, but really signposting towards the future. And so in terms of that, I think at ASH, and we spoke about this in the podcast a little bit, the last one, there are a couple of things which really had an impact. The first treatment combination, I guess it's important for us to talk about getting its license, is a combination of drugs which we already use and we've spoken about on this podcast, but are being put together in a different way. And so these drugs are teclistamab and daratumumab, which were put together in a study called the Majestic 3 study. And this was presented in the States in December and really showed quite extraordinary responses. And there was a lot of noise about this actually throughout the conference. So Jam, shall I hand over to you there to talk us through that a little bit and what this study showed?
This trial was called the Majestic 3 study. And as you said, it was a big study. It was a randomized study where half of patients got a combination of teclistamab, which is a bispecific antibody. We've spoken quite extensively about these agents last year, combined with a monoclonal antibody, daratumumab, which is one of our real backbone therapies. Now, there are a number of scientific reasons why combining these agents might be very effective as sort of dual immunotherapy in a way. This combination of what we'll call it Tec-Dara for short now. We all love abbreviations. Tec-Dara was compared to sort of two what we call standard combinations. So combinations that we've used in myeloma for a while that are licensed but slightly older, and at the time the trial was started would absolutely reasonably be seen as what we call a standard treatment for relapsed myeloma. And those combinations were daratumumab with pomalidomide and dexamethasone, and daratumumab with Velcade and dexamethasone, two standard combinations. These two combinations were compared to Tec-Dara. What did the results show?
Yeah, so this study was conducted in just under sort of 600 patients in lots of centres actually all over the world. And when you're looking at this data, you have to decide when you're going to figure out to present your results. So this is what we call a readout. And the readout was basically how long on average people are being followed up for. And this follow-up period was just less than 3 years. But at 3 years, the people who had this combination of teclistamab and daratumumab compared to the standard of care showed a significantly, quite extraordinary actually, response in that just over 80% of them were still on treatment and still in remission, compared to less than 30% on the standard of care arm. So a huge difference in the number of people still in remission on this treatment around the 3-year mark. And I think what's also really important to say, and we've spoken about this again on previous podcasts, Jam, is that what the data also showed us is, unsurprisingly, the people who are on the newer drugs and still in remission had deeper responses. More of them were what we call MRD negative. And so I think this basically it heralds a new era, really, of using these newer drugs in different combinations to produce these extraordinary responses. And this was in patients who weren't necessarily heavily pre-treated, but they'd been exposed to myeloma before, so they were relapsed patients. And you wouldn't expect so many of them to be in remission around the 3-year mark. So quite extraordinary. And what we'll see, I think, this year and next year and the year after is these newer drugs, what we call moving up the pathway. So being used, hopefully, as standard of care in people at the very beginning of their myeloma journey, or when their diseases come back first time round, because it really does look like they're going to change the whole treatment pathway in terms of the number of people they work in and how long they work for. So potentially really exciting.
So up to now, in terms of bispecific antibodies, they've been licensed as single agents. They are so effective as single agents that it is natural to say, well, this is a great starting point, but can we now, combine with other agents and see what we get? And there is a huge amount of data combining bispecific antibodies with proteasome inhibitors, with immunomodulatory agents, and also drugs like daratumumab. But this is the first combination that has been put forward in a licensing study, which is likely to be available potentially at some point this year as approved by regulators that it's safe and effective. So just to sort of highlight that point again, it is licensed but not necessarily available in your own country.
Definitely. But often when things are licensed, many drugs actually in the past, Jam, you've made a really good point there, I think, have achieved a license but not made it to particular countries in the world or particular parts of the world because, the governments of those countries think, well, actually there might be something better available, or this doesn't represent good value for money. But let the art of the optimist here, and I hope I'm of an optimistic nature. I think this data is so persuasive that I'm very hopeful that this will be available to certainly our listeners in the UK, but in many other parts of the world. But it may take time. It often does take time.
Indeed. And, we don't want to go too small print on this, but a couple of points to make is that this combination is for patients with relapse myeloma, which means they've had at least one treatment and their myeloma has come back. This combination was trialled in patients with what we call 1 to 3 relapses, and you have to have been exposed to, the drug lenalidomide and also a proteasome inhibitor. We know that immunotherapies can be extremely powerful, but the toxicity, the major sort of side effect that we worry about is infection. And I think it's clear is that this combination does cause infections, and these infections can be very significant. Infection is a theme that I feel we keep coming back to on the podcast, but we haven't done a deep dive on it yet. So watch this space in 2026, because we're going to do, I think, a number of pods on understanding infection in myeloma. Am I at risk? What is the role of vaccination? What is this thing, immunoglobulin? And just the more, simple stuff is like, well, it's flu season. Do I not go out now for 3 months? Can I go to a restaurant? So Sal, I don't know about you, but I think it's the combination of now having much more effective treatments in myeloma, which can dampen the immune system. Sadly, COVID-19 is still very much fresh in our mind. And you put these things together, and it can cause, uncertainty and anxiety. And I think we would really like to spend some time looking into these topics this year.
I completely agree. I mean, it's almost like now that we've figured out a way to accurately control the myeloma, we need to look at everything else that sits around it, which is how well those people are and their quality of life and how to keep them as well as possible. And clearly infection is a really important part of that. And there are things that we can do to minimise those infection risks. But it's really figuring out exactly what those risks are. What does that mean? I think really importantly for our listeners in terms of behaviour. I mean, I'm sure, Jam, you have the same experience as I do, in that people understandably frequently ask me, can I go and socialise? Can I go to the theatre? Can I go shopping? And so it's unpicking that piece that becomes critically important, particularly with these new drugs coming through. And I guess there's one other thing that I'd like to say as well, just about this treatment. This treatment, actually, the teclistamab and the daratumumab, is potentially going to be available on a clinical trial in the UK this year, actually, which is really exciting for older, frailer patients, for a subgroup anyway, in the IFIT trial, which has been run by colleagues from Lee, Charlotte Paulin and Gordon Cook. So watch out for that for our listeners, because this could actually be coming quite soon.
Yeah, but that will be for patients who haven't had treatment before. So that's for newly diagnosed patients. And this is, again, what we often see is that when the data and the combination looks as safe and effective in people with relapse myeloma, the natural thing to do is to look at it in first-line myeloma. And there are a number of trials ongoing around the world at the moment looking at these sorts of immunotherapies, bispecific antibodies in combination as a first-line treatment. Because the hope, of course, is that if in a relapse situation you're seeing 80% not progressing, around 3 years after starting treatment, what might that look like for people who've never had treatment before, who are potentially stronger, have a better immune system that may be more responsive to these sorts of treatment.
So it's really moving the field ahead. It's giving it a good old nudge in the right direction.
Absolutely. That's really lovely data to see from December last year. Sally, 2026, are we expecting any other new arrivals to the myeloma drug arsenal?
Well, yeah, particularly in the UK, and I think this is true globally as well. Everyone's obviously very excited about CAR-T, and Professor Ramasamy spoke about that on our Christmas podcast, didn't he, about the in vivo CARs and how extraordinary that seems. Now, that may take a while to come to clinical practice, the in vivo CARs. That's very early stage. But CAR T cell therapy, as we understand it at the moment, does have a license. Particular products have a license in many parts of the world and actually are funded as well in many parts of the world. Sadly, not yet in the UK. But as more products come through, which show equivalent efficacy, which means they work just as well as the other CAR T cell treatments, it becomes hopefully increasingly likely that these drugs will be approved in the UK and beyond for a number of patients. And indeed, this year, I think there's a cause for optimism, because it's quite likely that a newer CAR T-cell product will also get a license, and therefore that nudges it closer to day-to-day clinical practice. And that drug is called, or that CAR T-cell product is called anito-cel. And so watch this space. Let's see what happens with that. And again, really lovely data presented in America about this treatment and how well it works in relapsed patients. And again, we're optimistic, I think, Jam, both of us, aren't we, that these potential treatments will move further up the pathway in time to people who are newly diagnosed, but at the moment they still exist within that relapse space. And hopefully, as we understand more about the treatments, their availability will become more widespread.
I mean, the thing really going for anito-cel is that you can actually pronounce the name without like stumbling over 400 different consonants together. So yeah, no, anito-cel hopefully will add to the number of licensed CAR-Ts. And also when you get more licensed agents, it also then potentially means that one of them will get funded maybe in your own country. And that is certainly a big hope for us. So anito-cel hits the same target as the other two approved CAR-Ts. So it's a BCMA CAR-T. And actually, Sal, we've dipped in and out of CAR-T on the pod a little bit. And there was so much excitement after Karthik was presenting the in vivo CAR-T stuff. And we've had a bunch of emails saying, can you talk about CAR-T? And look, we're going to talk about it in some detail. And we've lined up a very lovely patient who's had CAR-T last year to talk about her experience. But we're mindful that, it's not an option at the moment for people in the UK unless they are potentially going on a trial. And that is something that actually we're doing in Oxford at the moment, a CAR-T trial. And I know you have a number open in Bristol as well. So I think that will be very informative. So just to add to the kind of the structure of what we're going to be talking about in 2026, Sal, we're going to do a few podcasts on CAR-T to really give it the time it needs for discussion.
Thank you for listening to the Myeloma Minutes podcast, proudly partnering with Myeloma UK. For more credible myeloma-related material and support, please visit the Myeloma website at myeloma.org.uk. That's myeloma.org.uk. Or call the info line on 0800 980 332, which you can find in this episode's description.
There is another type of bispecific antibody with a different target called cevostamab. So I just wanted to mention cevostamab a little bit because, again, I can pronounce it. Now, we've talked about bispecific antibodies that hit two different targets so far on the pod. So we talked about BCMA, and there's two approved bispecifics for BCMA. And we've also talked about GPC5RD, and there is one approved antibody, talquetamab, for that, which we talked about literally just at the end of last year, and it's only just become available in the NHS. So there is a third target, which is quite now advanced in development, called cevostamab. And Sal, you can reel off the target for that because we love names and letters.
So if I've got this right, it's FCRH5, but I need to double check that, Jam, actually. I'm pretty sure it is, which is again is another target on the... Yeah, exactly. Very snappy, isn't it? Which is another target, as you said, on the myeloma cell, and it comes with its own, therefore, its own unique side effect profile. Now, I'm less close to cevostamab because we don't have any clinical trials. We haven't had any running in that with this drug. It's not so sure actually how far it is through the licensing process. I don't know if you're cited on that, Jam. But again, it's another product that will be available for our listeners. And really importantly, these bispecific antibodies, if you've got a different target, arguably if you tried one and it stopped working, hopefully, with a bit of jiggery-pokery in between, you might be able to try a different type of bispecific antibody, latching onto a different target to get a response. And that's another really interesting piece, I think, Jam, isn't it, that we're going to be understanding in the next year or two is can you do that? Which way round should you do it? What makes it more or less effective? And then the nuance around that, which is, again, going to be quite a complex area, but we look forward to exploring that with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think that agent's still going to be in development this year. There's a big trial which is coming to the UK where that drug is being combined with pomalidomide, which is an immunomodulatory agent, or an IMID, and we are going to be running that study in Oxford, and I'm sure it will be available in other parts of the country, and that's an interesting and important trial. So immunotherapy, bispecific antibodies continue at pace with new approvals, new trials, both for frontline patients and also people at relapse.
Yeah, so I'm just going to run the risk of confusing anyone, but let's just chat through these bispecific antibodies. There's so much jargon, but your BCMA ones, we have got approved, elranatamab and teclistamab. There's another one, again, which is looking quite exciting, linvoseltamab.
Yep.
But again, that's not yet licensed, but those trials are coming through. Then you've got your GPRC5D. That's the target that gives you the skin problems and the mouth problems, potentially, but equally very effective. That is available in the UK in, that's telquetamab. And then you've got your FcRH5, which is your cevostamab. So, there's quite a repertoire, Jams, for us to kind of like figure out, isn't there, in the few years ahead. It's somewhat overwhelming, I think.
That's a very nice summary. And then, of course, you've just listed all of them as single agents, and then there will be all the combinations that come with them. And just to make everyone's head spin a little bit more, you can actually combine bispecific antibodies as well. And there is actually some very nice data when you combine teclistamab and telquetamab, for example. But we're going off in slight sort of maybe geeky tangents. But
we are. Bispecific wormhole.
Yeah. But the thing is, when you have these incredible building blocks, it's really important for the community to really logically and safely work out, this is how we should combine them, really carefully look and say, who is it working in? How long is it working for? Who's getting sick? Why are people getting infections? Because, you do all this fine tuning, and there's so much fine tuning that we still need to do with these agents. But, what that might mean in 5 years' time is that we can increasingly offer personalised and I hope time-restricted immunotherapy, which is highly effective.
We'll see where we are at the end in December of this year. But Jam, so just a kind of natural pause then, because we don't want to overwhelm everybody with all our geekiness. Perhaps we should Do you think it's time for us to just do a little reflection actually on the feedback that we've had from our listeners, and actually what you guys think would be useful for us to talk about going forward, what you've enjoyed so far, what we should be covering, and to welcome actually any more feedback and any more thoughts. So Jan, we've had a look through our inbox, which is nice and full. So thank you everyone who sent their emails in. But what have you found? What's been the theme that you found through looking at those emails over the last year?
Thank you. Firstly, for everyone who's taken their time to write to us, we really appreciate the feedback and the ideas. There's a lot of interest in smouldering myeloma, Sally, in terms of how we categorize it better, who's really at risk of progressing, and of course the treatments and the trials, specifically certain trials that are running in the UK. And I can understand why this has been quite a prominent topic in our inbox, because as we have mentioned, there is, there's debate and uncertainty, but also a lot of progression and understanding of the space. So that's been one big topic. Another big topic has been focusing on some topics relating to, myeloma in younger patients. We know that the average age of diagnosis is 70, but there is a big population of people under 50, under 60, topics relating to people who are, at working age and, have young children and potentially, other carer needs, and they're dealing with their own diagnosis. So I think a lot of people have written in with that. So I think we'd be very, interested to explore some of those topics in a bit more detail. Physical activity has come up a number of times. How should I exercise? What is the role of physiotherapy? How do I, look after my spine and my posture? And again, we've touched on that with, the wonderful Sean Malloy who came and spoke to us. But certainly I think we can really expand on those topics this year. And the last one is this topic of minimal residual disease and, measurable residual disease. It's like, what are the techniques of monitoring small amounts of disease, and how does this impact treatment? And I think for a UK audience, it's like, when will this technology become more widely available?
Jam and I, we've yet to cover, haven't we, the sort of holistic side of living with myeloma. It's something we're really passionate about exploring with our listeners, and we really want to delve into that this year. And we just got to line up our expert speakers really to do that, to really make sure it's as enriching and as engaging as possible. But that's definitely come through a lot, as you said, Jam. And also CAR-T's come up a little bit as well, in terms of when's it happening? There's so much noise around it. So appropriately, when's it happening? How can I get hold of it? What's going on with that? And a lot of people have been in touch about the Trojan horse therapy, so those newer kind of like classes of treatments coming through and how well they work, and what the future might look like, which I hope we've just spoken to a little bit in terms of myeloma. What's going to be next? What might the future hold for me in a few years' time? And then finally, I guess I just want to do a shout out to Sophie Castell, the sort of Chief Exec of Myeloma UK, because we had some feedback about her podcast as well. And I think, I really enjoyed that podcast, and it's so exciting to hear about the work that Myeloma UK is doing. And we've just really touched the surface, really, in terms of their enormous activity in their portfolio of work and how they advocate and represent patients so well. So I really hope that we can have more conversations with them and other members of Myeloma UK over the next year as well, to provide additional nuance, really. We provide the medical side, don't we, Jam? But I think what I'd really like to do over the next year is also provide the patient voice and the carer voice and all those other aspects of living with myeloma, the wraparound care, and Myeloma UK does that so well.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very sort of nice summary of the feedback we've got. And I think it does allow us to anchor our topics for 2026. We talked about the big picture things that hopefully will be happening. But what's sort of day-to-day myeloma practice like for you on the ground at the moment, with all the new drugs that we have had available, here in England and in the UK, people living longer? Are your clinics changing? Are the kind of support services that you have available for patients, do you have enough of what you need? How is it looking, and how would you like it to change?
Yeah, it's such an important question, Jam, and it's something which is very close to my heart. But if I'm going to be completely honest with you, the rate of pace of change in myeloma clinically can sometimes feel really hard to keep up with the needs of the patient. When we see people in clinic, hopefully we listen to them and we can understand their perspective and what we think might help them, be that, as you said, physiotherapy or sorting out, helping with infection, or even just reducing the time they have to spend in hospital, decreasing their clinic appointments, making sure that they can get their appointments when it works well for them. Immunoglobulin's a really good example of that, making sure it doesn't take too long to give that infusion, they're able to attend. All these things. So these sort of what we refer to as service improvements, things which you can bolt on to the actual treatment itself, which can really enhance quality of life. And I think these are the areas which increasingly now we do need to continue to focus on, to continue to develop and evolve, because otherwise we're doing our patients a disservice. But it's really difficult, because thank goodness people are living with myeloma for so much longer, but that therefore means the work, our work in clinical practice is just a lot bigger, thank goodness. And so getting your head around that and making the service run smoothly and streamlining it for the best outcomes for the patients is something I particularly want to focus on. And I think you do as well.
Totally. It feels like there are so many ways in which we could streamline and improve patient experience, new ways of giving treatments. Can we treat more people at home? A lot of these immunotherapies, even immunoglobulin, can be given as injections under the skin, reducing the number of hospital visits, using IT and video calls better, and working in a more effective way with our pharmacy services. But I think everyone is pulling together, everyone is trying their best. But when you have so many more options, and thankfully people living so much longer, you have to try and work out what parts of a service you need to expand and what parts actually are less relevant as they have been in the past. And again, just to segue onto a topic which we are going to talk about this year, because we haven't, which is radiotherapy. So I think that's a good example of something that is, continues to be, but maybe historically more, has been incredibly important in myeloma as an effective way of controlling pain and shrinking certain types of plasmacytoma, lumps of myeloma. Now, we still need it, but use it less, working out how we keep the expertise for people that need it, but understand that actually that's less of a resource that we need now than we did maybe 10 years ago, for example. But we need more infrastructure in understanding infection in myeloma. And we need to collaborate more with infectious disease doctors and get them really interested in actually the infectious side effects of bispecific antibodies. And
so work in practice, I don't know about you, but I've got a list of things I'd like to do. And every month the list gets longer.
I don't make lists, Sally, because they just get longer and longer. But apparently the best time to make a list is before you go to bed, I hear.
Oh God, I have that in my dreams. But
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but I try and cross off one thing a month, and it's just chipping away, isn't it? Really, just to hopefully, it's shifting that. I always have that analogy of a big boat. You're just trying to shift the direction the ship sails in a little bit, month by month to get closer to where you want it to be, because you can't do it all at once. It's just too much.
Well, the problem is like I'll manage to cross off 5 things off my, myeloma to-do list, and then, I won't take the bins out. I won't buy the milk. I'll forget to pick up the kids from school. But at least the new Telquetamab protocol is done. So, which it is now, thankfully.
Indeed.
No, but it's an exciting time, and but we have to earn our wage, because there's a lot to do, and it's quite nice actually, Sal, to really start with that big picture. Look, we've combined these new immunotherapies. This many people can be in remission after it, which is amazing. But like what that trickles down to sort of day-to-day treatment on the ground, there is, a massive, massive disconnect. And I think it's important that we do highlight that sometimes, and maybe more as we go through 2026, we can share specific things that we're doing to sort of hopefully improve the service on the ground.
More feedback, please, from everybody in terms of what you'd like to hear about, but also maybe even your service as well, because that would actually be really useful for us to perhaps disseminate, focus on, share, So any thoughts on that? Things that could really help you with your quality of life and your day-to-day living with myeloma, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, 2026 is here, Sal. Looking forward to this year of podcasts, and I'll see you at the next one.
All right, take care, Jam. Have a good couple of weeks.
See you later. This has been the Myeloma Minutes. We hope you found this week's pod engaging, interesting, and above all, understandable and genuinely useful. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast and share it with anyone who might benefit, from your online support group, your medical team, to friends and family. And as always, if you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover in the future episodes, please do get in touch. You can find us at www.themyelomaminutes.com or email us at themyelomaminutes@gmail.com. And you can find us on social media by searching The Myeloma Minutes on Instagram and Facebook. Many thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next one.